important issue. I bring to you House Bill 492 in the name of victims, in the name of survivors of child sexual abuse. Mr. Chairman, I do have some amendments. I don't know if you want to put the bill in the proper posture, but whatever's your pleasure.
Yes, let's go ahead and take up the amendments and put the bill into the posture that the author wants. So, Ms. Smith, can you go over those amendments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Amendment Set 2036. It's online, and I think it may be passed out right now. Amendments 1, 2, and 5 are all technical. Amendment 3 provides that there's no prescriptive period for actions against a person convicted of a crime against the child. And Amendment 4 deletes Section 2 of the bill, which provides for the revival of prescribed claims.
And so what this will do,
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, really briefly, this in essence will remove the retroactivity from the bill. It will also remove the 2-year look-back window. The insurance lobby had some concerns with the bill. I have spent the past 2 weeks working with them in good faith. These were amendments that we mutually agreed upon, and it is my understanding that their opposition to the bill has been removed. So the bill is purely prospective should these amendments be adopted.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and move that we adopt Amendment Set 2036. Oh, all right. Well, you do know the author wants to get them in get that in the posture. Then we can talk about the bill, or do you? I think the author knows me. All right. Go ahead. You go ahead.
I was trying to find out about under number 3. The crime. Is this new? Is that a new? Is there some limitation about bringing a criminal conviction against someone that has committed a crime against a child?
So this is just mirroring the language from the criminal code and placing it into the civil statute.
So
That's all in the criminal code?
Yes.
What I'm gathering is that there is a prescription period for someone who is convicted of a crime against a child currently.
Correct.
But if someone is with this amendment, and if this bill gets adopted, if someone is convicted of a crime against a child, it would not.
Correct.
This action would not prescribe.
Yes, sir.
So.
Okay.
No, we're talking about civil prescription,
Yes.
not the criminal prescription.
And in essence, it's my understanding, if these amendments are adopted, we would have a prescriptive period of 35 years from one's 18th birthday. However, if the predator has been convicted on criminal charges pursuant to this statute from the Children's Code, it would eliminate the statute of limitations completely.
Okay.
For those cases.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Marino.
Right, and this bill doesn't touch the prescriptive period for the criminal offense.
Correct.
There still is a prescriptive period that this doesn't change at all.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Johnson.
Yeah, we're still on the amendment.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll hold it to the bill.
Okay. Representative Amadei.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking back at the amendment.
Oh, sorry about that.
Got it? Okay.
Go ahead.
I was looking back at the amendment, so I'm not sure if my question is on the amendment or the bill, but you can tell me. You mentioned that this would run from the child's 18th birthday forward. So it's from the date that the child is no longer a minor. It's not from the date of the offense or the most recent offense?
Correct. In current law, the prescriptive period is 10 years from the victim's 18th birthday.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead. So move that we adopt Amendment Set 2036. Any objections to the adoption of those amendments? Seeing none, Amendment Set 2036 are hereby adopted. So, all right, so we got the bill in the posture of how you want it. So to present it to us, and right now, you touched on what the prescriptive period is, and clarify that again currently. For, say, a child has been molested when they're 12.
Sure. So right now, the current prescriptive period is 10 years following the victim's 18th birthday. So basically, until they reach 28 years old.
Okay. And so you're asking to extend the prescriptive period for how long? Not talking about where there has been a conviction of a crime.
So this would extend it to 35 years following the 18th birthday. And I do have some testimony that would clarify why I am proposing 35 years.
So that's an additional 25 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. And Representative Freeman.
Would you mind if I made the opening statement,
Sure.
Mr.
Oh, I'm
Chairman?
sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. There is a worldwide epidemic of child sex abuse, with at least 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 13 boys sexually assaulted before they turn 18. Child sexual abuse is a social issue that occurs in all social groups and institutions. It occurs in families, religious groups, youth serving organizations, athletic institutions, etc., and it affects everybody involved in these groups. And importantly, these groups are not mutually exclusive. Individuals always inhabit multiple roles, simultaneously belonging to multiple social groups. The overwhelming majority of perpetrators of child sex abuse are someone the child knows, and most abuse occurs in the family setting. The trauma stemming from child sexual abuse is complex, and it's very individualized, and it impacts victims throughout their lifetimes. There is an overwhelming body of science exposing the ways in which the trauma of child sexual abuse during childhood impacts memory formation and the repression of memories. It is settled that PTSD, memory deficits, and complete disassociation are common coping mechanisms for child victims. Trauma is only one of the barriers preventing children from disclosing abuse. Among other barriers, children often lack the knowledge needed to recognize child sexual abuse. They lack the ability to articulate that they have been abused. They don't have an adult they can disclose their abuse to, don't have opportunities to disclose the abuse, and aren't believed when they actually come forward to disclose. Studies suggest many victims, as much as 33%, never disclose their abuse to anyone. The disclosure of child sexual abuse is a process and not a discrete event in which a victim comes to terms with their abuse. Often this happens in the context of therapy. Sometimes it is triggered many years after the abuse by an event the victim associates with the abuse. Other times it happens gradually and over time as the victim recovers in their memory. In fact, the average age of disclosure of child sexual abuse in a study of 1,000 victims was 52 years old. Yet, until recently, many states blocked criminal charges and civil lawsuits well before the age of 52. By the time most victims were ready to come forward, the courthouse doors were locked, shutting victims out of justice. Statute of limitations are judicial housekeeping rules, as we know. There are 3 compelling public purposes served by child sex abuse statute of limitation reforms. Number 1, statute of limitation reform identifies hidden child predators that allow the abuse to the public so children will not be abused in the future. 2, it shifts the cost of the abuse from the victims and society to those that actually caused it. And 3, it educates the public about the prevalence and harm from child sexual abuse to prevent future abuse. In closing, I will just say there is a vibrant national and global movement for statute of limitation reform with respect to victims of child sexual abuse. The trend is toward elimination of civil and criminal statute of limitations and the revival of expired civil claims, which we are not addressing any longer in this bill. As of April 2021, 31 states, including Louisiana, have introduced statute of limitation reform bills for child sexual abuse. Arizona, Colorado, and Kentucky already have new statute of limitation laws going into effect. This year, Louisiana is one of 25 states trying to extend or eliminate civil statute of limitations. There has been incredible progress across the nation, yet Louisiana has not made any changes to its short civil statute of limitations for child sexual abuse since 1993. In the United States, since 2002, 40 jurisdictions extended or eliminated their civil statute of limitations for child sexual abuse, and 21 jurisdictions revived expired claims. I think it's high time for Louisiana to join this movement. This bill is an opportunity for our state to reach the top for children of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I have Mr. Adams at the table, who, if you would indulge, would like to make a few comments.
Sure. Thank you. And just introduce yourself and who you represent, anybody besides yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Miller, members of the committee, and thank you all for this opportunity to speak with each of you this morning about this most important issue as it relates to victims of child sexual abuse. My name is James Adams, and I'm here in my own personal capacity as a 50-year-old lifelong resident of Louisiana, a father of four amazing kids, and a survivor of sexual abuse. The current Louisiana law is limiting the time that a victim of child sexual abuse has to take action against those who is responsible is shamefully obstructive to the healing process of victims. The case of a child who was sexually abused is very different from every other type of prescription under Louisiana law. We know that the majority of children who are sexually abused say nothing of their abuse. And as Representative Hughes has mentioned, those who do most often wait. They do so when they're much older. So much older, in fact, that the average age of a victim when they disclose the abuse is 52. That's the average age. And there are many reasons why someone might not say anything. And most of them revolve around the very real and deep feelings of shame and guilt that corrupt the mind and wounds the souls of the victims. I mean, just ponder this. Have you ever experienced the feeling of shame, of guilt, because of something that you've done? You know, when something terrible happens to a child, something like a child is raped or is otherwise violated in any sexual manner, they internalize it. They believe it's their fault. They're filled with the weight of guilt and shame. See, pedophiles will often look for a child that's already vulnerable, often because of some other situation that probably also isn't their fault. Maybe it's a difficult home life, absent or abusive parent, or it's just simply a scared little child. These are often the targets of a pedophile, and then they begin the grooming process. These are often the children who are sexually abused. Now, what reasonable person would expect a victim who's paralyzed with this guilt and shame to disclose their abuse according to some arbitrary deadline? But that's exactly what the current law does. In my experience, I was a 10-year-old in the 5th grade. I was the new kid in school, and I was shy and scared to death. In my case, my abuser was my parish priest. He did horrific things over a period of many months. And I remember thinking, surely this must be my fault. I mean, after all, he's an adult. He's a priest. I'm just a 10-year-old kid. And of course, I remember thinking that I'm the only one. I'm the only one this has happened to. Well, today, I'm 50 years old, and it's still very uncomfortable to speak about. I mean, I really don't want to talk about these awful things, and I'm quite certain that you guys don't want to hear about all these awful things. But If I could just speak to my 10-year-old self, if I could just say, this isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Don't be afraid. Go tell the police. Tell anyone who will listen. Tell them what happened. But when victims finally get the strength and the courage to talk about what happened, often they're too old. They're told, it's too late. Sorry. Good luck. I mean, that's an unreasonable position to put these victims in. I mean, the current prescription, do you think that it helps victims? Or does it help the pedophiles? I was in my 40s when my oldest child reached 10 years old. And that's when I could no longer hide some of the real effects of the abuse. I became withdrawn, deeply depressed. I didn't want anyone around my kids. I was distrustful of everyone. It was then that I sought help. I didn't know why these feelings of shame and guilt that I've become so familiar with over the years were suddenly stronger and more painful, and literally paralyzing, truly paralyzing. I came to recognize that these are merely the ripple effects of the abuse. It's woven its way deep into the fabric of my life and the life of my family now. To many around me, everything seemed normal. I was married. I have a beautiful family. I have a good job. I'm active in my Catholic faith, which was and continues to be a great struggle for me. But you see, everything seemed normal until it no longer did seem normal. And then the defensive walls started to crack and come tumbling down. And I was able to seek some help. I went to the Archdiocese of New Orleans and shared what happened. But as often happens, the process, it's rather humiliating. When I asked if we could quietly do a settlement claim, do something so I wouldn't have to keep coming back every time I needed help, well, that's when I was met with stonewalling and other empty words and promises. I mean, I'm not a litigious person at all. I've never filed a suit in my life. But here I am faced with no other option but to sue my own church. Well, unfortunately, that's what I had to do. And then, shortly after that, the Archdiocese of New Orleans files bankruptcy. Well, I was appointed to the Unsecured Creditors Committee by the Office of U.S. Trustee, and I currently serve as the chairman of that committee. I've become somewhat familiar with the issue of prescription, and I've seen how at least one organization plans to use prescription to intimidate survivors. In a recent objection filed with the courts, the Archdiocese of New Orleans has said, and I quote, "At the appropriate time, if mediation is not successful, the debtor will object to all or most of the abuse proofs of claims because, among other things, the vast majority of them are prescribed on their face." The prescription issue is used to make survivors go away. So if a survivor is older than 28 years old and they come forward, they're told, you waited too long. Too bad. I've heard the stories of many survivors of sexual abuse, and not just those abused by clergy, but those abused by a teacher, police officer, a neighbor, a family member. While the Catholic Church seems to make headlines related to child abuse, child sexual abuse, and pedophiles, that only represents a small fraction of child sexual abuse cases. It happens everywhere. I mean, just look at Boy Scouts of America, any religious denomination, public schools, private schools, U.S. Gymnastics, Penn State. The statistics tell us that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 16 boys experience sexual abuse as a child. Well, just look around the chamber, look around the body of the House of Representatives. A colleague, a staff member, a friend. Well, certainly each of you have a constituent, have many constituents perhaps, that are victims of child sexual abuse. And they struggle just to survive. These are the individuals. These are the individuals who will be affected by this bill. They'll be affected directly by your vote on this bill. And if there are those who are concerned about the term, the length of time, 35 years, well, just consider this. If you learned that your adult child was a victim of child sexual abuse and they came forward, would you want their rights to actions to be preserved? Or would you be willing to look them in the face and say, I'm sorry, you waited too long? Can't help you. So before you today, this is an actual opportunity to help victims of child sexual abuse. It's the opportunity to preserve a victim's right to action for when they are more likely to seek that right to action. I ask you, please, set aside the politics. Set aside the lobbying efforts. This issue at hand is crystal clear. There is no gray area. You will either vote to extend and protect the rights of child victim sexual abuse, or you will vote no and allow pedophiles and their enablers to the continued protection of an arbitrary deadline. To any reasonable person, this should be a no-brainer. This is not a partisan issue. All who share the fundamental belief in the dignity of the human person and the value of life, they must act to preserve these rights of the victims of child sexual abuse. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your time. I thank you, committee members, for this consideration. And if you
Thank
have any
you for your
questions,
charge and sharing your situation with us, your experience in being here. Representative Landry for a question.
This is more of a statement. As a lawyer, I would not typically support extensions and prescription, but in particular, given the Catholic Church, not only, were so many of its members guilty of this horrible crime, but the church itself actively hid what was happening, transferred, these people so that the crimes continued. And I think this is such a specific and special circumstance that I could not agree with you more. And anything I can do to help pass this, I'm willing to do.
thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative.
We do have a number of people who want to speak. President would like to speak, so members just keep that in mind. Representative Johnson for a question.
Mr. Adams, thank you.
Thank you.
I know this didn't come without some personal cost for you to be here today. I don't know that I've seen more courage in this chamber. And, I've got children, now I've got grandchildren. You doing this today is a heroic act. And I thank you. And Rep. Hughes, thank you for bringing this action. I've just got a couple of questions. By making this prospective, I understand why that may be necessary, but are you risking preventing there being insurance coverage available to victims by doing that? Is it excluded now in insurance policies? that are being written to schools?
I'm not sure, Representative. Mr. Cunningham, Kevin Cunningham, who represents the insurance industry, was here. He had to leave, but I can't answer that. I apologize.
I mean, I only ask that because victims, if they've been harmed, should be able to be compensated. And if you're dealing with institutions that can file bankruptcy and take a free walk on the situation, then you're left with the insurance companies. And if this is a means by which to prevent recovery for victims, I'm not for that. But I just want to make sure, I'm supportive of your bill, but I just want to make sure it's not a, I don't want to say a trap, but it works adverse to your goal of taking care of those victims.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't speak to that.
I'm not sure.
And the
No,
insurance
sir.
fellow's not here.
No.
I don't want there to be unintended consequences. 35 years, when you mentioned this to me, when we talked before, I thought, my goodness, that's unbelievable. And then I realized that really there should be no out for anyone that does such a heinous monsters that do this to children. So, again, thank you for bringing this bill. I do want to know, I want to know between now and the time we get to the floor whether or not that will harm those victims
Sure.
by depriving them of insurance.
You have my commitment, Representative. We can have those conversations and get that clarity.
My problem's not with the length of time, although
Sure.
it was originally. It's my concern is what do we do about coverage that excludes that
Sure.
for failing to oversee people who are charged with the responsibility of our children.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Marino for a question.
Just briefly, I'm supporting your bill, but where do we get the 35? Is that bringing us in line with what the other states are doing that are changing their time limitations? That was all.
And it's really consistent, Representative, with the data, with the science, being that most victims really don't come to terms with this and come forward until they're roughly 52 years old. That's the average age. And so that's how we landed on the 35 years.
That's similar to what other states are doing?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hughes, it's my understanding on the insurance side of this is that most insurance policies have an intentional tort exclusion, and that doesn't really matter what your prescriptive period is. They're not going to cover these types of things because they're not going to cover somebody who's bad actors. It's just not going to happen. I do have a concern about the 35 years. As we all know, and as a lawyer, you know that most tort actions are 1 year prescriptive.
I'm not a lawyer, for clarity.
I thought you were a lawyer.
No,
Sorry. Well, 1
Hard
year.
enough to be a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. You got me fooled. Most tort actions are 1 year prescriptive period, and I'm not saying that should be here. Right now, we're about 10 times the average prescriptive period for this. And I'm not going to argue that maybe it should be extended. But when you go to 35 years, you're almost to the life expectancy. I mean, you probably could have just said no prescriptive period at all to get there. But with the reason we have prescriptive periods is a couple of reasons. One is just being able to defend a claim. And I'm not saying that every claim, of course, is frivolous. Of course not. Most of them are not. But to try to defend claims, you have evidence, you have witnesses, you have all that. 35 years later, how in the world can a person who may be innocent defending themselves this long? So I would like to suggest an amendment to 20 years instead of 35 as a compromise on this. And if Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer that as an amendment to move it from 35 to 20.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I first, Representative Freeman, we will entertain that motion, but I would like to have the opportunity to hear from some of the other people who have put in green cards and would like to speak.
I know Mr. Adams wants to say something, and with all due respect, Representative Freeman, the bill in its current posture is already a big compromise on many parties. But, though I'm not a lawyer and I didn't study torts, and I say this with all due respect and humility, when we talk about the average time for an average tort claim, I just, respectfully want to say this is not an average tort claim. This is not a slip and fall. We're talking about the heinous rape of children.
Oh, I understand that, and that's why I'm not okay at 10 times, and I'm willing to go to 20 times the average tort prescriptive period to try to compensate for that. So I'm not saying that what 10 is the right number, and I'm also willing to go to 20 to say, hey, we need to take this into consideration. I'm just thinking if you go to 35, why just go to, there's no time limit. I mean, you're almost to the
That
life
would be my
expectancy.
preference.
Ideal.
Obviously, right, exactly. But again, there is some issues. There's two sides to every coin, and while I surely empathize on the side of the victims, absolutely 100%. There's also the other side. Sometimes, they may not be guilty, but you have to try to defend those kind of claims. And once you get there, 35 years out, witnesses, evidence, all that stuff that the court has to make a decision on may not even be in existence anymore.
Representative Freeman, thank you for that suggestion, but there is already a requirement for mental health professionals to certify the claims. So this helps eliminate the frivolous claims. Representative, I can tell you assuredly, very few people are going to make this stuff up, are going to go to these lengths and put themselves out there. For what? Very few. You will know those people very quickly. Mental health professionals will certify. That's what's required now. It addresses that. Pushing it back to 20 years, it's not helpful. 35 years, you're right, I agree. We should eliminate it all. This is a lifelong effect. The damages not only affect the individual victim, but it affects their families. It affects the parents of the victims who will later on discovering, I couldn't protect my kid. I didn't know about this. If they would have only told me. This is far-reaching. 20 years, that's not a solution. I ask you please reconsider that.
All right. Thank you. Let's go ahead and hear from some of the other people who wanted to speak, and keep in mind we've got a lot of cards that people want to speak. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jackie Berthelot, President, would like to speak, and Letitia Payton, if y'all wouldn't mind coming to the table and introducing yourselves, and then giving your statements.
Hi, thank you for listening to my testimony today, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I am the mother of a victim. I am married with 6 children, so I can attest to you that sex abuse affects the victim. It affects, in my case, it was my son, my second son.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
I'm sorry. My name is Letitia Payton.
Okay, thank you.
It was my second son, my second oldest son, who was abused by our parish priest. My 4 younger children and my oldest son were also affected by this, as well as my husband, who is a deacon in the Catholic Church. We had known our priest for 12 years. He is now in jail and serving a sentence for what he confessed to doing to our son. I want to say that while the average age that a victim comes forward is 52 years, we are the exception. While we didn't ask to be brought publicly in any way in this matter. In fact, we wanted to do what almost every other victim wants. We wanted to crawl into that little hole and not speak to another person, be left alone because our family was going to have to endure as well what our son was enduring. With my husband being a deacon in the Catholic Church, we became public. Because we came forward with this, we were all affected. Our community was affected. The whole diocese was affected. It's not just the victim who really feels the biggest impact of this, but it is their families and their communities as well. For anybody who would come forward in 35 years to go what we are going through, you have at it. That's for you, because I can tell you the torment that we have felt as a family is horrible and awful. I got to know many victims because when we were on the local news, people saw our story, people heard my testimony that I was going to fight for my son. Many victims started calling and saying, I didn't have a mother who would stand by me and fight for me like you're doing with your son. Like you and your husband are doing, you're very outspoken. We didn't have that. Some of them, they didn't have it because the family members didn't believe them. Some of them didn't have it because they refused to tell their parents because they were so young, or their parents, at the point where they could tell their parents were now at the point of being elderly and did not want to subject their parents to what this would cause to them. So they kept silent. There are many, many, many victims whose stories are not being heard. These victims are they want to remain in the background. They want justice. They want the truth. And they just want to be heard. Many of them need counseling. They need to be able to file these civil suits at the point where they are ready to do it. Not because some law says that in 5 years you should be able to do it. Many of them who were victims at age 16, they're not ready to do this by the time they're 28 or 38 even maybe. Then you also have to factor in if they're, let's just say 35 and they're starting a brand new family, they're going to drag their wives, their young children all into this mess when they're starting a very new family, new life maybe. They will probably come forward mostly when they feel their lives are more stable and they can get through what has been done to them. So I ask you, please, to pass this. It's very important to victims. It's very important to the ones who cannot be here, who cannot speak because of the tragedy that has been done to them. I am fortunate that I can be here on behalf of my son and on behalf of the victims who cannot speak for themselves.
Thank you, Ms. Payton. Mr. Berthelot, please introduce yourself.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, members of the committee. Thank you. My name is Jackie Berthelot. I live at 33 Derby's Drive. I'm from Gretna, Louisiana. I am 66 years old. I am a survivor, not a survivor, I am a victim of clergy abuse as well. I attended St. Joseph's School in Gretna, kindergarten in 1959, and through 8th grade in 1968. Following that, I went to Archbishop Shaw High School, another Catholic high school near my grammar school, as a freshman in 68, and graduated in 1972. So I had a long time in Catholic education. I want to give you a little bit background because I think it might bring some of the perspective of why I couldn't come forward. And I'm 66 years old. I'm way past the average, I think, that we talked about earlier. My mother, who passed away about 2 years ago, volunteered and worked at St. Joseph's School for over 60 years to do whatever was needed at the school. She was a product of the 50s. I was born in 1954. My mother was. I had 3 other brothers that attended St. Joseph's as well, and my mother would room mother, work cafeteria, whatever it took for the school and for the church. My mother was a devout Catholic, a winner of the Order of St. Louis Medal given to her. I have pictures, but I won't show you those pictures, by Archbishop Aymond, the Archbishop of New Orleans at this time. I was abused. I was an altar boy, 4th grade. We had a charismatic priest come through our parish, and recruiting altar boys to serve mass and serve weddings, and back in those days it was customary for a wedding, you would get a $10 tip or something to go along with that. I lived on 9th Street in Gretna. My grandfather bought that home in 1920, and the church is on 6th Street, so we're going to talk about just a few blocks. So it's very easy for me to be called to come over to serve a wedding and pick up $10. In those days, that was a good amount of money to have in your pocket. Little did I know that I was being reeled in by a pedophile who I think when a lot of this comes to light will be seen as one of the worst pedophiles that maybe this country has ever seen. He's been defrocked many years. Although he was a pedophile, he was actually promoted to Monsignor, and even after the Archdiocese of New Orleans filed for bankruptcy, they did give him a 60th anniversary party, which I thought was outrageous. But my mother passed away last year, and 2 weeks before she died, she was cutting cake in the church, in the school classrooms for the St. Joseph's Day altar. On my father's side was Stanley J. Ott. I don't know if anybody in this room knows who he is, but he was the Bishop of Baton Rouge. Bishop Ott, his mother was Lucille Berthel Ott, was my grandfather's sister, my dad's first cousin. In our eyes, Stanley, as we called him, Stanley Ott, was rising to the top of the church hierarchy very quickly. Had lots of connections in Rome, and was going right up to be bishop. I believe he was probably going to be groomed to take over when Archbishop Hannon had to retire. Unfortunately for Bishop Ott, he passed away. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 56 years old, and as Bishop of Baton Rouge, and is buried here in Baton Rouge, in the cathedral in Baton Rouge. I am also, although I am a councilman, I'm an elected official, just like you all are. I've run for office. I've been elected 3 times to serve my community, my constituents. It took me 50 years to admit to anyone what happened to me, because not only was it happening at the church, I was offered parties to go to Notre Dame Seminary, swim parties after Mass or after weddings, where other potential priests or students at the seminary would take part, and other friends came with me. I wasn't alone. In some cases, there were 5 or maybe less that went. I'm not from a wealthy family, although I have a college degree. I did well in my life. I spent 40 years in the pharmaceutical business. Thankful to my education in Catholic school. I identify as a Catholic still. And with Shaw, along with a federal judge and other alumni of that school, we still raise money for scholarships to put kids in those schools. We gave 2 scholarships away 2 weeks ago to children that could not afford to go but wanted to go to a Catholic school. So although I have my history with my abuse, I still participate in as much as I can, not only to help kids go to Catholic schools, but to thrive there and move on.
Mr. Berthelot, first I want to appreciate the fact that you had the courage to be here, but we've got a lot of witnesses, and we want to try to condense it into your experience and how it relates to this legislation, because we have to go on the floor at 2 o'clock, and I want to try to at least get through this bill. I'd love to be able to get to Representative Larberdane's bill. So I understand we want to talk about a lot of things, but we do have a lot of witnesses that want to testify. Sure. So if we can all, because I really don't want to have to impose a 3-minute rule on such a important subject.
Right.
So
I'll get right to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. And so my point is, I just want to say that I suppressed this for a long, long time, and until I was approached by some classmates to bring my situation out, I was the person who had to withdraw from family functions, Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever. To this very day, I don't attend anything like that. I have cried many times alone in my room, wherever I was on business, that these feelings of what I was reliving in my mind were just too overwhelming. I approached the Archdiocese of New Orleans about some therapy. I didn't really get much back from them, so I approached 2 Baptist ministers that have churches in Gretna that are now counseling me and helping me figure this out, because even at my age, I don't understand some of the stuff that happened and why it was suppressed over these years. I am in favor of the 35-year plan as well, because it was said earlier, these things, when you're in our situation, you suppress them, and then you get married or your life changes for some reason, and they're there and they come back. And as I told one of the attorneys that I spoke with, and I'm not really big into suing anybody, but this is the thief that keeps on stealing. And the time period, yes, it might as well be for life. Because I'm going to tell you, no matter how this ends with this bankruptcy with the church, it won't end with me. I will remember this for the rest of my life. And I will deal with these feelings and emotions I have, and hopefully with the help of the counseling I'm receiving now from these 2 wonderful ministers that I know Councilman Marino knows as well, but I won't mention their names today. I feel better about my life today at 66 than I did at 56. So I urge you to consider the 35-year rule or proposal. I don't think it makes a difference really, because it's a life sentence. It's a life sentence that I feel that I'll serve. So I'll end it with that. I thank the committee for its time, and I appreciate
thank you.
Everything you've done for us.
Teresa Pastor and Quinn Hebert, and again, I ask that you be mindful of our time and introduce yourselves and go ahead.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity.
Sure.
My name is Teresa Pastor. I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana. I'm not involved or associated with any organization of any sorts. I'm a mother of 5 children, a victim of child sex abuse, and the mother of children who are also victims of child sex abuse. So I just want to briefly share my story. 38 years ago, when I was 4 years old, an adult family member sexually assaulted me. Immediately after the assault, I let my mother and grandmother know about the incident, but it was dismissed because they didn't think that it was possible that it had happened. They explained to me that I must have misunderstood the context of the interaction. I was left very vulnerable and terrified of this family member. I would never go in a room alone with him ever again. This family member has since passed away, and I've made my peace with that. However, this interaction drastically altered my perception of men, sexuality, normalcy, trust, relationships, and ultimately changed the course of my entire life. Even at 42 years old, I cannot say that the damage caused has been fully repaired despite years of therapy and reprogramming. But I am hopeful and I'm positive, and I'm lucky because I have the means to do this for myself. Fast forward 37 years to last July of 2020, when my 4 and 5-year-old were getting ready for school and informed me that an older stepbrother of theirs, a teenager, was repeatedly sexually assaulting them in the home of their father. It took a lot of bravery for them to share that information with me, but it was also disturbing because they talked about it as if it was completely normal, which was the scarier part. So, as you know, as a mother and a victim myself, I feel that it's my duty to fight for the voices of these children, because I can't imagine that the same thing happening to them that happened to me. After pressing charges against their abuser, the children were interviewed by an investigator, and within 1 hour's time were expected to openly speak with a stranger about an incident that they were very uncomfortable speaking about. They were also required to answer questions that they didn't entirely understand for their age range. Their abuser was allowed to refuse an interview for the investigation. Since then, I have fought to have them removed from that environment with no success, and their father and stepmother have done everything in their power to sabotage the investigation, the children's counseling, custody, and my career. After a year of waiting, the DA has finally only reviewed one of my children's interviews and has thus far concluded that it appears that the children may have been coached because of response to one question that my 4-year-old daughter likely did not understand. And although the case has not been closed or dismissed, there is a big chance that there will be no justice for my children and that they will have to continue to live in an environment with their abuser. Although it's only one piece of the system that likely needs revision, I pray that the statute of limitations is extended so that my children and children like them can have future justice whenever they're ready to speak up and stand up for themselves. And I do agree that 35 years probably isn't enough. But Representative Freeman, in all due respect, even if we don't have proof, even if everything has been dissolved, give us a shot. Give us a shot to speak our voice, to try to have closure, to try to make right what's wrong. But regardless, just give us a shot to speak. I'm 42 years old, and this is the first time that I'm openly speaking about the sexual abuse that happened to me as a child. The only reason I'm here today is for my kids, and they know that I'm here. They're 5 and 6 years old now. They don't entirely understand what's happening today, but they know that I'm here for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spencer, and thank you for your courage in sharing this and being here today.
My name is Quinn Hebert. I'm involved with an organization based in Lafayette called the Society of St. Peter Damian. We founded in 2018, and over the past 3 years, our purpose has been to try to expose and reform the corruption, specifically in the Catholic Church in the Diocese of Lafayette. But over the past 3 years, I've been privileged to speak to many victims. And I say privileged because it is incredibly humbling to have somebody twice your age confide in you absolutely horrendous actions, the worst that could be. So, like I say, during that time, there's one case in particular that I think is perfect to say here, that there was an African-American woman from Grand Coteau who approached us. Just a wonderful woman, and she explained to us that for 20 years she had been abused by the Jesuit priests at Grand Coteau. And what I think is very important here, when she came to us, she was 53 years old on the dot. So I think that's just an example of why the age needs to be extended to the 35 years. Because, and this is the second point and final point, is that particularly when dealing with the church, and this is unfortunate, I'm a Catholic, not a perfect one, but I still, I'm not trying to just attack the church. And I know many of your constituents are Catholic, and bishops are very influential. So there may be some hesitation to touch things that's so tied into the church. But when it comes to victims, and you'll hear more from them directly, trying to get justice from an institution that is so powerful. And the only way to really approach that is from a kind of a financial side. So sometimes, in order to get justice, the only option is through the civil courts, which is unfortunate. It's not ideal, and I'm always amazed at the humility of people to say that, we're not just out to get money, but it's the only option left, and that option needs to be available to all, especially those who don't come forward. Psychological science is pretty clear, it seems, that there is a delay in wanting to come forward with this sort of information. So I'll wrap up there, but I thank you for considering this, and I really encourage y'all to pass this.
Thank y'all for your testimony. All right, next we'll hear from Kevin Bourgeois and Jillian Edwards Coburn. Good afternoon, and just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jillian Edwards Coburn. I am originally born and raised in Opelousas, Louisiana. Grew up in Lafayette, Louisiana. Attended Cathedral Carmel. Graduated from St. Thomas More and graduated from University of Louisiana Lafayette. I currently live in Lago Vista, Texas, as my husband had been displaced for the military and for other reasons. I'm an activist. I'm a published writer, and I advocate for women in abusive relationships and with women who have experienced abuse. I am speaking on behalf of 3 individuals. And to touch upon a case, I would like to speak on a woman named Cassandra Malbrough. She is now 53 years old. She writes, she was 11 years old when a man raped her, and she told her mother, and she never believed her. Again, she was raped at age 13, raped for 6 months, and her mother still did not believe her. There was no justice. She traveled for 47 states in her life. As her entire life, she was told she would just lay on her back, and that's all she could do, from her own mother. She would like to begin healing. She states that it was not for Jesus and his grace, love, and mercy, and myself, who advocates for women like myself, who I am a victim. She apologized she isn't here as she does not have the means. She would like to find peace, and she hates where she currently is in her life. She thanks all the members for listening to her story and understands it was never her fault. She just wants fugal justice for all that has been tied down, raped, and no one stopped them. Time to lock up the predators who live amongst us. Thank you, Cassandra Malbrough. The second victim is Catherine McCormick Thibodeau. She is from Carencro, Louisiana, and she's one of my best friends. I went to school with her. This is Katie when she was 4 years old when the abuse began. This is her at 12 years old when the abuse stopped. She really wanted to be here, but she's in Texas also and does not have the means to be here. I'm going to try to keep this brief so that others get a chance to have a voice and share their experience with child rape and or molestation. When I was a child, I was molested by Wilbur Trahan. He was my next door neighbor and my dad's friend. I was molested from the ages of 4 to 12 years of age on 4 separate occasions. As a child, I couldn't understand the impact it would have on my life, and still as an adult. I was scared and traumatized by this predator and still have nightmares to this day. I learned recently that he had passed away, and I thought that hearing the news would make it better and the fear and trauma would somehow disappear. However, I was wrong. My dreams have actually gotten more frequent. I'm still learning how this childhood trauma works and how to shake it, what I now feel like is a mental disease. Rewind to my childhood. I came from an amazing family with amazing parents. My poor parents. I can't imagine what my parents had to endure learning of what had happened to me and now realizing that they had a damaged child who would forever be different from their siblings. I'm sure they were grateful to finally be able to understand why I was the way that I was. As a child, I had horrible outbursts and would throw and break things, not realizing the frustrations of the secrets I held in for many years. As long as I could remember, I had been suicidal and always wanted to die. I begged God every single day and night before I went to bed to please let me die in my sleep and please don't make me live through another day. I started keeping a journal and would randomly write in it, maybe once in a while or even once a month. Mostly when the suicidal thoughts were extreme and of course when I had yet another failed suicide attempt. Sorry. I never intended on telling my parents. I was taking the secret to the grave with me. How embarrassing if they found out, not to mention if it got out, then people would know I was damaged goods. I hid my journal under my mattress in my bedroom. I'm not sure what awful storm came through this week, but this bad storm ultimately caused a leak that bubbled up about 6 inches off the ceiling and leaked directly on my bed. I went to school and the slow leak continued. I completely forgot about my journal. While at Catholic school, my mom got into my room to inspect the leak and maybe dump the pot that was filling up my water till it got fixed, and of course then moved my mattress. And what does she find? My journal. She found my written prayer to God, begging him to take me or let the next suicide attempt be a success. I explained in the prayer what had happened to me as a child. My secret was out, and this would forever change the course of my life. I come home from school and could tell she had been crying very hard, and what looked like all day she called me in her room. She then said, "What happened to you?" Me thinking because I'm such an awful child, and she's just asking me what's wrong with me because we had been in a terrible argument the day before. I then took the side and I saw my journal behind her bed. My heart dropped. I felt like I was going to pass out. This was never something I wanted to tell anyone. I begged her not to tell my father what she did. Had she had not found the journal, I still would have never told anyone, likely even to this day. After working with countless Boy Scouts of America victims and taking their claims with Jillian with their lawsuits, I then realized that this is the norm. 98% of my Boy Scout clients have kept the secret, and some of them their entire lives. I'm literally the first person they tell, and with tears in their eyes telling me their story of their abuse, then they tell me, please don't let this get out. I don't want my wife or kids knowing. Still, even a grown man in his 40s or even 80s is still ashamed to tell their family. A lot of the married ones still can't understand why their marriages are falling apart, why it's hard to have healthy relationships, why they're so insecure with the people that should accept them and love them the most. They have never received any counseling or therapy for this abuse. Their lives and minds were never and will never be the same. Neither will mine. Because everything we have done to forget this or keep this awful secret will ultimately be led to be abusing drugs, being sexually active, violent outbursts, insecurities, and many other forms of mental illnesses. I've scored the perfect job with my best friend, being able to work with other victims, and has slightly been a healing process for me. And realizing I'm not alone, however, the trauma and PTSD will never go away. And how many of the victims' clients who are still afraid to talk about their abuse be okay to live a fairly normal life? Because the only one to heal from something like this is to talk about it. I have encouraged so many of our clients to seek counseling and speak about it with their therapist because it's the only way to not get past it, but at least just be able to cope with it and accept it. The pain never goes away, but if I had not received the counseling that my mom made me attend when I was little, I would have eventually committed suicide or drug overdose. If victims can't come forward about it later, then they will never get the chance to heal. And if they do not make it out, not self-sabotaging their lives and their families and end up dead, wouldn't it be nice for all victims to have the option to come forward later? Better later than never, and are never too old to start over and heal. Therapy and holding a predator accountable is only the first step to healing.
Ms. Coburn,
yes.
I'm sorry. You said you have another statement?
I have one more, yes.
I'm going to ask that we not read the statements.
Okay.
We can submit those into the record.
Absolutely.
Because we have other people who
that
are here live to testify, and I know those are very important stories to share with us, but we also have people who have traveled here, and we can put those into the record. So,
thank you.
All right.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you.
My name is Kevin Bourgeois. I will be brief. I wanted to thank the chair and members of the committee and Representative Hughes for sponsoring this bill. It's very important. I'm a clinician, licensed clinical social worker for 25 years, and I'm also a victim and survivor of clergy abuse when I was a teenager in high school. And somehow managed to go straight forward to college and get a master's degree from LSU here in Baton Rouge and have a full-time private practice. Yet the part of what I wanted to talk about today, what's important about the prescriptive period, is that even though I had the education and the background to understand about my own abuse, it was buried, because that's what we do, is we keep these secrets buried deep down forever until we can't anymore. So I'm 54 years old now, so this bill wouldn't apply to me at all. But it's important for me to be here to speak out for other survivors who are being abused today and the ones that were abused yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your courage. All right, we have Mark Vath and Richard Windmann. And, good afternoon, and just identify yourselves. And again, keep in mind that we are limited in our time. So.
Okay. Thank you very much for having us, and very grateful that you're hearing us today. Would like to thank Representative Hughes as well. My name is Richard Windmann. I'm the president of SCSA, Survivors Network of Survivors of Childhood Sex Abuse. I am a victim and survivor myself. I was molested by the Boy Scouts and later on by a policeman. His name was Stanley Burkhart, and he was actually the commander of the pedophile unit. And I don't like to say molestation. Well, what it was is rape, sodomy. I can tell you that that after Stanley Burkhart was caught and went to jail, I actually went forward to the police department to report it to two different officers, and one hung up, told me no, don't call back. The other one actively discouraged me from saying anything. So if you can imagine, when you have a parent that tells you as a youngster, if I ever catch you messing around with a man, you're in trouble. And then your perpetrator telling you that nobody's going to believe you, and if they do, you're going to be in trouble. And, you know, the perpetrator is corroborated what your mother basically said. I can tell you that victims and survivors, they live a life of hell, of absolute hell. They all have PTSD. They all, and this is without exception, depression. Some of them have dissociative disorder as well. What they do is they don't have any support. They may not even want to talk to a counselor. So they self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. They also partake in the risky behaviors as well. I came forward when I was 52. So to just address Representative Freeman's amendment, I wouldn't support that. The reason is because I've been doing the advocacy work for almost 10 years now. And I read a lot of research papers. I talk to mental health professionals in the field, but everybody agrees that it's late 40s, early 50s, with the average being 52, like myself. I haven't seen such papers or any professional opinions to suggest that 20 years is the area where they come forward. And with that, thank you very much. I'm very grateful for you hearing me today.
Thank you. Thank you for your courage for being here.
Thank you. My name is Mark Vath, and thank you, Representative Hughes, committee, and Mr. Chair. Quick story, I would have liked to address Representative Freeman as well. I come from a highly Catholic family who had a bishop. One of my uncles was a bishop. And on a Sunday afternoon, we would have two Catholic priests, a couple of bishops, the district attorney of New Orleans at the house. But I'd like to tell Representative Freeman that if I would have come forward at age 15 and told my family that I had been molested by a priest, I would have been sent to the mental hospital until the age of 18, or to an exorcism to get the demon out of me. So I lived with it. I lived a dissociated life. I'm unavailable in the present moment hardly at all. I'm unavailable mentally and emotionally a lot. I didn't have these memories until I was 50. And they came about as the result of family members finally sharing secrets that they had hidden for decades from my generation. That was just what they did back then. So the prescriptive period, yeah, I'll go along with Representative Freeman saying there should be none. But it'll take 35 years, and I thank you for hearing us today.
Thank you. Thank you for your courage for being here and your testimony. All right. I think that's all the cards of people wanting to speak. We do have a motion by Representative Freeman for an amendment to change. Okay. As soon as we get people. Nine. 2, 3, 4, 10. Okay. All right. We have an amendment by Representative Freeman, and if Ms. Smith would just touch on the amendment, where it would go in the bill, and or the current amendments that have already been adopted. Okay. So, So Representative Freeman, where we're gonna, your amendment is to change the term from 35 years on page 11, page 1, line 11 to 20 years. And I believe that's the only spot in the bill where the claim is, where the time period is. Any discussion on the amendment? Is there an objection? See an objection from Representative Jenkins. You want to speak into your objection? All right. I think we all know what the amendment is. Ms. Sanders, call the roll. If you're agreeing with Representative Freeman's amendment, you're changing the bill to extend the prescription to 20 years as opposed to 35 years. So Ms. Sanders.
Representative Amadei, Representative Robbie Carter, Representative Wilford Carter, Representative Eccles, Representative Emerson, no. Representative Freeman, yes. Representative Hodges, Representative Jefferson, Representative Jenkins, no. Representative Johnson, no. Representative Landry, no. Representative Larvadain, no. Representative Marino, no. Representative Muscarello, no. Representative Nelson, no. Representative Presley, Representative Seaball, yes. 2 yeas, 8 nays.
Okay, with that, that amendment fails. Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of this failing amendment, I'd like to make another amendment to this bill. I'd like to remove the prescriptive period altogether and have no prescriptive period on this cause of action.
So, Ms. Smith, can we discuss what amendment we would have to delete to accomplish that?
Okay, so what we would do is, so page 1, line 11, where it says is subject to a limited prescriptive period of 35 years, we would change that to is not subject to prescription. We would delete line 12 and 13. We would delete majority. On line 14, we delete the word majority. And then lines 15 and 16, we would delete that last sentence.
Okay. And of course, it would still be prospective only, correct?
Chairman, am I allowed to comment? I don't know if I'm...
Yeah. All right. So, yes, go ahead and Representative Freeman speak on your proposed amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I thought we needed to have some limitation on this. I think 35 years is just, I thought it was too much. And that's why I said, if you're going to make it 35 years, why don't we just take it completely off? Because I think 35 years almost to me seems a little bit arbitrary in a sense, although I understood the 52, 53. So I think if we're not, if we're not going to have a real limitation, which I think 20 would probably be a real limitation, and 35 doesn't help this gentleman who testified because he was well past the 35 years, just take it all the way off. And let's have no liberative prescription. I mean, I don't see the need for it at 35 years. 20 makes sense, but the committee said they don't like the 20, and I respect that vote. So if that's not the case, let's just take it off and let everyone who has a claim, like this gentleman, would not have been protected under 35 anyway. Let's remove it.
Thank you, Representative Freeman. Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really briefly, and I know the amendment makes the victims and survivors really happy, and in an ideal world, I would like the amendment as well. However, all I have in this world is my word, and for the past 2 weeks, I have negotiated in good faith to keep this bill alive, to quell the opposition, and to hopefully leave here and get a bill to the governor's desk and do something meaningful for these victims and survivors. I would ask that we please reject this amendment. I give Representative Freeman that I'll work between here and the floor to go back to all of the negotiators, and if everybody agrees, I'll be happy to accept that amendment on the floor, but in good faith, being that I gave my word that I would keep this bill in the posture that was adopted, I would object under those terms.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Marino.
Yeah, I was just going to state that I think the amendment is going to harm the bill, especially since this is an agreement that was made, according to Representative Hughes, with the insurance companies in mind as well. I think this amendment will harm the bill, so I'm joining him in opposing that idea.
All right. So Representative Freeman has made a motion to delete the prescriptive period, to which Representative Marino has objected. Ms. Sanders, would you call the roll, please?
Representative Amade, Representative Robbie Carter, Representative Wilford Carter, Representative Eccles, Representative Emerson? No. Representative Freeman? Yes. Yes. Representative Hodges? Representative Jefferson? Representative Jenkins? No. Representative Johnson? No. Representative Landry? No. Representative Larvadane? No. Representative Marino? No. Representative Muscarello? Yes. Representative Nelson? No. Representative Presley? Representative Seaball? Yes. 3 yeas, 7 nays.
With that, that amendment fails. All right. I think that's all questions. The board is clear. You make. Let me just read the cards remaining. President will provide information if requested in support. Morgan Lamondre, sexual trauma awareness and response. Not wishing to speak, President in support. Gabriela Perez. Not wishing to speak, present and in support. Desiree Charbonnet. Not wishing to speak, present and in support. Ryan Haney, Haney and Associates. Not wishing to speak, present and in support. Susan East Nelson, Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families. Not wishing to speak, present and in support. John Danina. not wishing to speak, present, and in support, Peter Robbins Brown, Louisiana Progress Action, and not wishing to speak, present, and in opposition, Tom Costanza for Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. So, Representative Hughes, you can go ahead and close on your bill.
Mr. Chairman, first let me thank you, as always, for your graciousness and for being such a statesman, and to each and every member of this committee, thank you so much for your attentiveness this morning. I can tell you several months ago I had no intent of bringing such a bill. In fact, I had my 5 bills pretty much identified, but when victims and survivors started reaching out to me, I felt I had an obligation to carry their voice. I can tell you this has been mentally taxing for me, hearing their stories and negotiating this bill over the past several weeks. So I could only imagine the trauma as victims that they are facing. Again, this bill is brought on behalf of victims and survivors. I thank you again for listening to their testimony, and I would ask for your favorable passage.
Thank you, Representative Hughes. Representative Jenkins has moved to report House Bill 492 with amendments. Is there any objection to reporting House Bill 492 with amendments? Seeing none, House Bill 492 is reported with amendments.
Thank you, members.
Thank you. All right, next up we have Representative